Hi everyone, so I have attached my PowerPoint onto the discussion post so that way you guys can read along as I'm going through my presentation. So today I'm going to be teaching you guys about cognitive impairments. So let's start off by saying what a cognitive impairment is. A cognitive impairment is categorized by the lack of development inside the cognitive domain. It's also the lack of adaptive behaviors during the developmental stage, which can affect academic performance. So a child who suffers from a cognitive impairment will actually develop a lot slower than a child who is not suffering from a cognitive impairment. Now, there's three different levels to a cognitive impairment. We have mild, which would consist of somebody who is extremely high functioning, that they'll need little to no help to perform their daily activities. Now, somebody who has moderate impairment will need that more help every day just to do their daily activities. And a child who is severely cognitively impaired, they will need somebody all the time in order to help them just get through their daily life activities. So there are a few different cognitive impairments that I wanted to talk about with you guys. So the first one I think is extremely important, especially for us as counselors, and this one is learning disability. Now, a learning disability affects a child's ability to retain and process information. So a child who's suffering from a learning disability might have a hard time retaining information. Meanwhile, another child who's also suffering from a learning disability might be able to retain that information, but might have a hard time linking different information with one another. So something that I want us to think about as counselors and know that just because a child is suffering from a learning disability does not mean that they have below average intelligence. So a child who is dyslexic might be suffering in reading or writing, but they might be excelling in mathematics. So just because a child is suffering in one subject does not mean that they can excel and succeed in a different subject. And I think that's something really important for us to think about. Also, individuals can have just one learning disability, or they can have multiple different disabilities as well. So another one I want to talk about is dyslexia. Now, dyslexia is a specific language-based disorder, but dyslexia is actually one of the most common learning disabilities. 15 to 20% of children who have learning disabilities suffer from a reading or spoken-based disorder, such as dyslexia. Now, dyslexia is found in both males and females of all different ethnic backgrounds as well. So the next one I want to talk about, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and that is ADHD. Now, one thing people get really confused of, and I think it's important for us as counselors to know this, is that ADHD is actually not a learning disability. ADHD may affect a child's ability to learn because they may be easily distracted or it might be hard for them to focus, but it is actually not considered a learning disability. Children with ADHD have a hard time paying attention, but they can process and retain that information. They just have a hard time focusing on one thing for a long period of time. So another type that I want to talk about is brain injury. Now, a brain injury can consist of a traumatic brain injury, a stroke, or an illness, which can be a brain tumor. So it is very hard to predict how a child's brain is going to be affected by this brain injury. So some injuries have immediate noticeable behaviors, while others kind of go under the radar and might not be really noticed for a little while. So the severity of the damage will be able to tell us how that child's brain is going to react to the injury. And lastly, I want to talk about genetic diseases. Now, genetic diseases consist of Down syndrome and autism. But I also want us to keep in mind that just because an individual may be suffering from a genetic disease does not mean that they cannot be high functioning and that they can't be in a regular class setting. So an example I want to give you is I intern at GLC, and we currently have no IEP kids inside the school. But we do have one kid, Adrian, who is autistic. But Adrian is very high functioning, that he has that ability to be inside a regular classroom setting. So I want us to always keep in mind that just because a child may be suffering from one of these diseases does not mean that they can't be in a regular setting. So next, I want to talk about the diagnosis for each of these. So they all kind of are a little bit different. So for a learning disability, a medical examiner will be needed, and they'll look at things such as school performance, academic achievement testing, testing and also psychological testing as well. Now, dyslexia, a doctor will look at a couple of different tests. A lot of these tests will be reading or writing comprehensive-based tests, but they will look at a few different ones. Now, ADHD, a psychiatrist will give different attention span tests, and symptoms will be administered and discussed between the psychiatrist and the client as well. Now, a brain injury, we will need more specific tests, such as a CAT scan, an MRI, and an ICP monitoring are very important and will be able to tell us what effects that brain injury has on the child. And then for genetic diseases, we have prenatal diagnosing, so the parent will know if their child is going to suffer from a genetic disease before they give birth. So some signs that I wanted to talk about and kind of look for, because early detection, as we know, is so important. It's important to get that child the modifications and interventions that they need as soon as they start school. So it's good for parents to look out for attention, decision-making, judgment, reasoning, language, and memory in our child, because a lot of those are different signs that your child could be suffering from a cognitive impairment. So, cognitive impairment in children. Research shows that 10% of children are suffering from a disability, and 10% of those children are suffering from a specific disability. So that means that 2 to 3 children in every single classroom is suffering from a disability. So it is important for us as counselors to know those statistics and know how many children in each of our schools and classrooms are suffering from a disability. Now, implications in the classroom. So I think that it's very important for teachers who have children with disabilities to have self-regulating learning. So this is self-monitoring. So the child will be monitoring their own thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and emotions. And this is actually shown that when a child is aware of this, it actually advances in the prefrontal cortex, which we know is important in cognitive function. So also some things that teachers can do are assign peer tutors, provide visual cues as well for the children, also teach self-questioning techniques, also with providing cooperative learning strategies with groups. So now when a child is diagnosed with a specific cognitive impairment, that teacher, of course, will make certain modifications. So if a child is suffering from ADHD, that teacher might give more timing on tests, they might give more one-on-one sessions, or maybe books to bring home as well. So once that diagnosis is made, those teachers will make different modifications specifically for that child as well. So now the most important, school counselor's role. Now, school counselors are responsible for addressing the developmental needs of all their students through a comprehensive school counseling program that encourages and enhances student success in academics, career development, and social skills. So, according to the ASCA. Now, the ASCA also says that counselors are in the best position in the school to advocate for all children. So I think it's very important for us to constantly be advocating for our children, making sure that they are meeting the needs that they need, that they are getting that treatment, those modifications, interventions, so that way they can succeed every single day. It is also important for counselors to provide consultation with not only teachers, but with parents as well. It's important to let parents know the modifications we're making for their child, what interventions we've tried and might not have worked, which interventions we've tried and are succeeding for their child, because most likely if a child is suffering at school, they might be suffering at home as well. So it's important to let parents know these different techniques, so that way if they need to help their child with homework or studying for a test, they can try these different techniques that work for their child as well. So also, consulting with the teachers are so important for a counselor. It's important to give teachers different strategies, different interventions or modifications, so that way that child is constantly succeeding. And I personally think it's so important that as a counselor, we are going into those classrooms every day. that we're making sure on a weekly basis that those modifications are being met for that child. Because if those modifications or interventions aren't taking place in the classroom every day, that child might not be succeeding. And then every day those aren't happening, they're falling more and more behind. So I think it's so important for us to make sure that teachers are staying on top of it and they are using the different interventions and modifications that are needed and work for that child. And lastly, I think that counselors are in a great position to advocate, like I said, but also promote awareness throughout the school. I think that we have that ability to talk to the teachers, our principal, our vice principal, different counselors that are with us, so that way we can promote awareness throughout the entire school. So that is the end of my PowerPoint. I hope you learned a lot, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.